What do deadlifts, squats, and leg press all have in common? We'll tell you in a second, but first let's talk about one of the most popular body parts people like to train, your glutes. Increasing the size of the derriere is extremely popular among gym goers, especially the ladies. It's easy to do since there are a ton of awesome glute exercises. However, it becomes a problem when people only want to grow their glutes but not their legs. Now we have a problem. So what do those first 3 exercises have in common? They're awesome glute exercises and you won't be doing them. Find out why as well as what exercises you should be doing in this video. Plus, we're going to even throw in some glute training hacks as well as a free program. In order to train your glutes without hitting your legs and get optimal results, there are a few bits of information you must know. First, you need to know what exercises you should use. You also need to know which ones not to use. You'll then need to know how to use these exercises, for example, what weight to use and how many reps. You'll also need to know the key training variable to bigger glutes. We're going to share this with you as it ties all of your training together. We'll throw a few hacks throughout the video as well. Because of the complexity of the glutes, all these parts are essential, and if you fail on any of them, you'll be stuck with either small glutes or big legs. Be sure to catch all of these so you can be successful on your journey to bigger glutes. Now let's start this process by discerning what exercises you should use. This is probably the trickiest part, as it will determine if your legs will grow or only your glutes. Therefore, we need to have a small anatomy and physiology lesson. We promise it'll be small, but knowing the function of your glutes is vital to training it properly. It will allow us to pick the best exercises to isolate them, as well as what exercises to steer clear of. Your glutes are actually made up of 3 muscles: the gluteus maximus, gluteus minimus, and gluteus medius. Together, they make up the strongest muscle group in the human body. They're situated on the back side of the body at the hips, between the lower back and upper part of the hamstrings. This makes it the literal link between the upper body and lower body. And we say link in the literal sense. Your glutes are part of a critical group of muscles collectively known as your posterior chain. Your posterior chain is a chain of muscles that runs down the posterior side of your body, the back side of it. It runs all the way from your neck, all the way down to your feet. The muscle right above the glutes is known as the erector spinae, commonly known as your lower back, and beneath the glutes are your hamstrings. In this format, your posterior chain acts as a flexible support system for the body with your glutes as the pivotal muscle. Due to this centric location, your glutes are involved in just about every single movement you do throughout the day. They're the literal powerhouse of the body. Because your glutes are involved in so many movements, there are a lot of great exercises to train them. At the same time, their involvement in everything makes it difficult to isolate them. Seriously, they're always interacting with other muscles. This is going to limit the amount of exercises you can do, and all the usual suspects are off the list. But before we decide what ones we want to do, let's take a closer look at the glutes function. One of the primary functions of the glutes is to extend the hips. This occurs when your hips are flexed and must return to the erect position. Further, this flexion can occur in 3 positions. The first is when the torso is bent over and must be pulled back to an erect position. Think about a back extension for this movement. The second is when the hip is flexed but only the legs are forward and must be pulled back. A good example is when you're walking, your leg goes forward, plants on the ground, then drives the body forward. The third is when both your legs and torso are flexed forward like in a deadlift. In all of the movement patterns, the glutes are the primary driver. This is why exercises like deadlifts and Romanian deadlifts are commonly used to train the glutes. So, should you use them? No! At least these deadlift variations. Yes, they train your glutes, but they also train your hamstrings. There are some good deadlift variations we'll go over later. Another very important job is hip abduction, or swinging your leg to the outside, away from the body. External rotation is another movement pattern similar to hip abduction. Think about being in the lower part of a squat position. Hip abduction is what's responsible for preventing your knees from falling inward and keeping them pushed out. Both of these movements might be okay, but there are a few variables you need to consider. But first, let's go over the exercises you can't do. Knowing these will be very important as many of your common go-to glute exercises aren't go-to anymore, especially the big ones. Right off the bat, we need to cut out all types of squats and lunges. This includes back squats, front squats, sissy squats, split squats, step-ups, dumbbell lunges, goblet squats, all of them. Even the leg press is a no-go. All of these squat exercises include knee flexion and extension. Some include a lot. What this means is that the quadriceps are going to be activated, making these a no-go. Another group of exercises are your hip hinges. Now, this group of exercises consists of some classics for the glutes: deadlift, Romanian deadlift, sumo deadlift. This also includes single leg variations of these, such as the single leg Romanian deadlift. By their definition, hip hinges involve the flexion and extension of your hips. While the hamstrings are primarily responsible for flexing the knee, they're also involved in hip extension, especially when there's a greater degree of hip flexion. Remember this, as it will be important for the exercises you should do. But what this means is that all of these premium glute exercises are off limits. Even the barbell hip thrust is up for question. Generally regarded as the best glute exercises, only certain people can use it, so keep watching to find if it's suitable for you. So now you're probably asking, then what can we do? Don't worry, there's still enough to keep you busy. First, you want to use exercises that don't have knee extension, or very minimal amounts. If you do this, you will effectively take out the quadriceps. At the same time, you don't want an exercise that has a significant amount of hip flexion. Again, higher degrees of hip flexion will utilize the hamstrings. On the other hand, a less amount of flexion will have less hamstring involvement. Before we get into the green light exercises, we wanted to address two exercises that may be okay if you do them correctly. The first is the American deadlift. The American deadlift is very similar to the Romanian deadlift, or RDL, except there is more emphasis in hip extension at the top of the movement. In fact, the exercise is performed by actually ending with a slight posterior pelvic tilt, making it a more glute-centric exercise. However, as there is hip flexion, it can still recruit the hamstrings similar to the RDL. One way to mitigate the involvement of the hamstrings is to not allow the barbell to go below your knees. From here, it will be up to you to decide how much risk you want to take. Another movement which is in the maybe category are rack pulls. Rack pulls are basically deadlifts, but the bar starts from a raised position. It's this raised position which changes its appropriateness level for glute-only training when compared with the deadlift. Technically, you can do a rack pull from any position, from just 2 inches to above your knee. From a training perspective, this allows you to work on various sticking points in the movement, or places that you're weakest at. However, for our situation, we want to adjust the height to mitigate the use of the hamstrings. So similar to our advice with the American deadlift, start with the barbell a few inches above your knees. This will mitigate the use of the hamstrings. You can also choose to end in a similar manner as the American deadlift. When you perform both, focus on driving your hips forward rather than pushing your legs down, which will activate your quads. So now let's get into exercises that will definitely be good for you, and we'll then explain who can use the hip thrust. The first is the glute bridge. These exercises look similar to the hip thrust. However, with a hip thrust, your back pivots on the back of a bench, increasing the range of motion in the hips, which also results in greater knee flexion. These two variables are what challenges the quadriceps and hamstrings. In comparison, the glute bridge has your back stay on the ground throughout the whole movement. This mitigates the range of motion in both your hips and knee, making it more glute-centric. It's also easily modifiable, making it easy to load. This makes it a great primary exercise when trying to isolate the glutes. When you perform them, concentrate on squeezing your glutes and thrusting them forward. You can also perform another variation, a raised feet glute bridge. Another hip extension movement is the cable pull-through. This is performed using the cable machine and a rope. You stand facing away from the machine and the cable going between your legs, where you hold with your hands. Allow the cable to pull your hips backwards and then powerfully extend your hips, concentrating on squeezing your glutes. Kickbacks are another great option. A kickback is performed by starting with a bent knee. You then drive the leg backward while simultaneously extending the knee. A good movement to think about is horse bucking. That's what you want to do. A great variation is a standing cable kickback. You will attach the cable to your ankle, then perform the same kickback motion. You can also perform this from the quadruped position. Back extensions are great, but you must train them properly. While you set up, be sure to have your feet flared out. This will mitigate use of the hamstrings. Reverse hypers are awesome movements to perform. Ideally, you have a reverse hyper extension machine at your gym. If not, you can do a variation by leaning over a box and doing a kickback with both feet. Two other great movement patterns are hip abduction and external rotation. As far as the gluteal muscles, these exercises are going to primarily target the medial glutes. These are the glutes on the side of your thighs. Because of this, you actually have a lot of options to train these. The first is a standing hip abduction exercise performed with a cable machine. Connect the cable to your ankle and swing your leg out to the side, keeping it straight. You can also use lying hip abduction using body weight or a band. This is done by laying down on your side and while keeping your leg extended, lifting your leg up. Another choice would be quadruped hip abduction external rotation. Get on your all fours and then lift a leg out to the side. Okay, so it might look a little like a dog peeing on a fire hydrant, but it's a great exercise for your glutes. Now, one of our favorite glute exercises are frog pumps. Frog pumps are performed by laying on the ground with your feet together and your hips open. From here, you then perform a glute bridge. As your legs are out to the side, it eliminates the involvement of the quadriceps and hamstrings and places all of the force on the glutes. And now for the hip thrust. Who can do them? Due to the biomechanics, it will unfortunately train the hamstrings and quadriceps. However, people's individual body structure can dictate to what degree they feel the movement in different muscle groups. Try them. If you feel it in your hamstrings or quadriceps, you need to try some other exercise. However, if you don't and are okay with a possible little leg growth, do them. So now that you know what exercises to use, let's go over some programming. We'll then put all this together with a free program. But first, a training hack. Use a mind-muscle connection. The mind-muscle connection is a method of training when you focus on the specific muscle you want to activate. This will increase activation of that particular muscle to a higher degree. What was once just a theory, thanks to sport researchers, we now know this is a real phenomena. Using a mind-muscle connection will improve the training of the glutes while also helping to further isolate it. This is very important for the hip thrust. Now for the training variables. Of all variables that can affect glute growth, total volume is the most important. Training volume refers to the total amount of work that a muscle performs throughout the session or week. Researchers have built a well-established relationship that shows a dose response. This means that more volume results in more muscle growth. Therefore, in order to maximize growth in your glutes, you need to choose the training variables that maximize volume. If you don't, you sacrifice growth. The first variable is training frequency. Training frequency refers to how many times a week you will train the glutes. Will you train once, twice, even 3 times? Under normal situations, researchers believe that training a muscle twice a week produces the most growth with the greatest intensity. However, there's also reason to believe that training a muscle 3 times a week may even be better, at least for a short time. Therefore, you should train at least twice a week, 3 times if you're in a hurry to get bigger glutes. Another variable which can optimize muscle growth is your rep scheme. Your rep scheme refers to the number of reps and sets you perform a movement. Ultimately, you should use the entire rep scheme. This includes 1 to 15 reps. However, your glutes are always working, so using very high reps of 15 plus once in a while is beneficial. You'll see how this plays out with your program. That said, your ideal range for muscle growth is going to be a moderate amount of reps, from 8 to 12 reps. This range produces the most reps at a heavy enough load to produce maximal growth. Now it's time. We can now talk about the most critical component in your glute training. It's a principle known as progressive overload. Progressive overload states that for continual muscle growth to occur, it must consistently experience slightly greater work. This basically means that you need to lift slightly more every week if you want bigger glutes. By lifting more weight or doing more repetitions, you are sending a message to the body that it needs a bigger, stronger muscle to deal with the extra stress. In your case, you need to put more work on the glutes. To get your glutes to grow, this is what you need to do. On a weekly basis, increase the work performed with your exercises. For example, let's say that one week you perform the American deadlift with 100 pounds and perform 10 reps. This means that your total training volume that week would be 1,000 pounds. Now, if you keep lifting 1,000 pounds every week after, you'll sweat and burn some calories, but your glutes won't get any bigger. Therefore, the next week you're going to want to lift more than 1,000 pounds, maybe 1,050 or land at 1,100 pounds. This process continues on, and you will grow your glutes. Here we go, we promised you a free glute training program to grow your glutes while not building your legs. Here it is: American deadlift 4x8, raised feet glute bridge 4x8, frog pumps 3x10 to 12, rope pull through 3x10 to 12, standing cable kickback 3x12 to 15, standing cable hip abduction 3x12 to 15. Use this template 2 to 3 times a week and swap around exercises as needed for optimal glute growth.